Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be continuing on with our macOS development with AppKit tutorial series, and in this particular tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can create a label for things like text fields and sliders and all that kind of stuff. Just, a label in AppKit. Now, it's a little bit more involved than it would be in UIKit, right? Because if you're familiar with UIKit, in UIKit we have a UI label that we can use. However, we don't have something like an NS label or something like that. We have NSTextField, NSText, and NSTextView. All three of these allow you to edit text or make them non-editable labels, right? But you have to configure them to be labels. They're not labels by default, like you might expect NSText or NSTextView to be, but no, they're editable by default. You would expect NSTextField to be editable by default, and it is, but this will be the easiest way to allow us to create a label. It's a little bit more involved with NSText and NSTextView to create a label than it would be for the NSTextField. If you want to learn more about NSText and NSTextView, look those up in the documentation. They enable certain features that NSTextField doesn't. But for now, let's go ahead and get started with creating our label. The first thing that we want to do is create an object of the type NSTextField. So let's go into Xcode. And beneath our class declaration, but above our view did load, we are going to say var, we'll call it label, equals NSTextField. And inside of our code completions, let's go over some of the initializers that it's showing us. Let's see. So what we can do is we can give it a frame, which we would use if we weren't using programmatic UI. We could give it a coder, which is that in particular is used by storyboards. We could give it a label with a string. We could do all kinds of stuff. But what we're going to do is we're just going to keep it empty for now. Okay. All right. There we go. So now that we have our NSTextField, let's go ahead and go into our configure UI method, and we can configure this to be a label. Now to do this, there are a few rules that we need to follow. First, we must disable the bezel of our text field. 2, we must make sure it's not editable. All right. 3, we have to make sure that it doesn't draw a background. And then 4, we have to make sure that that nothing is selectable. So let's go ahead and go down into our configure UI, and we'll follow this bit by bit. All right. So first, we're going to give it a string value for what text we want it to display. So we'll say label dot string value. This is going to be a string. We'll set it equal to this is a label. All right. Now, the first thing that we need to do to configure this is to get rid of its bezel. So we'll say label dot set, let's see here. Dot is bezeled equals false, like that. All right. So now we've disabled the bezel. Our next rule. Oh, VoiceOver is being glitchy again, it looks like. So let's try and turn that off and then back on again. All right. Now, we need to make sure that our text field isn't editable. So label dot is editable. Label dot is editable. We'll set this equal to not true, false. So now we have the fact that our label is not editable. Next, we need to make sure that it's not selectable. So label dot is selectable equals false. And then finally, label dot draws background equals false. All right. Now that we have this, we need to set the translates auto resizing mask into constraints to false. So label dot translates auto resizing mask into constraints equals false, like that. All right, and then we need to say view add subview label. All right. And finally, let's set up the constraints. Our label we're going to set up in the center of our view again. So we'll say ns layout constraint dot activate. And we'll say label center x anchor dot constraint is equal to view center x anchor. Label center y anchor dot constraint is going to be equal to view dot center y anchor. And then we'll go ahead and set the width anchor as well, just to remain consistent, but we do not need to provide a width anchor? We can if we would like. So we'll say label dot width anchor dot constraint dot, or not dot constraint dot, so the constraint is going to be equal to a constant of, let's say, 600. All right. And so now that is our code. Okay. NS layout constraint. All right, let's go ahead and run our code now. If we run this, we get a successful build. And kind of let it do its thing. It's rebuilding and stuff like that. And here we are. And now I just get this is a label and no indication that it's a text field or that it's editable or anything like that. It just acts like it's static text, which is exactly what we wanted. If you try to click on it, you try to select stuff or anything like that, you can't do it because we disabled all of that. And you can see it doesn't have any bezels or anything like that. It's just text. All right, so let's go over again briefly what we did in review. So here we are inside of our view controller. Let's go back up to the top. And the first thing we're doing is, of course, importing the Cocoa framework. We're defining a class called view controller that inherits from NS view controller. That stuff you should know already. We have a object called label of type NSTextField that doesn't take anything in its initializer. If you want to see any of the other initializers that NSTextField has, read the documentation. You'll find all of that there. And just a reminder, NSTextField is editable by default because, well, it's a text field, right? What else would you expect from an NSTextField? But again, you can make it static text as we demonstrated here. We're overriding viewDidLoad, and inside of viewDidLoad, after we call its super viewDidLoad method from NSViewController, we are calling our own configureUI method. Inside of this configureUI method, we are configuring our NSTextField object to be static text by first setting its string value. And we're setting that to this is a string value. We're making sure that our NSTextField doesn't have a bezel by setting is bezeled to false. We're making sure that our NSTextField object isn't editable by setting is editable to false. We're making sure that nothing in our NSTextField is selectable by setting its is selectable property to false. And finally, we're making sure that our NSTextField does not draw a background. Then we're enabling programmatic constraints and adding our view to the subview and adding our view as a subview to the view directly contained within our view controller. And then we're setting up its constraints. And when we run it, this is what we get. We get this is a string value in the center of our window, just static text. nothing indicating it's a text field of any kind. So that pretty much does it for this video on how you can create labels from an NSTextField in AppKit. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.